People forget that when we go about detox protocols, a lot of these toxins end up in our gut to be disposed of, and we're not considering the gut too, or just detoxing, or we're just working on healing the gut, but we're not working on cleansing, or we're just working on healing hormones, but not realizing that our gut is a big part of why our hormones are imbalanced because of the toxic loads. Your body is always working in harmony, or at least it's trying to, and the symptoms of it is when your body is not in harmony and it's in disharmony. So today we're going to talk about the gut's impact of all of this, because many of you are on doing candida cleanses, you're doing heavy metal detoxes, or maybe you're just doing liver flushes or gallbladder flushes or colon cleanses, or maybe you're doing things like parasite cleanses, or maybe you're working on healing the gut or removing gluten. But there's a huge synergistic relationship on going through what's called a 5-hour protocol. We're going to talk about all of it today because so many of you have tried a lot of advanced things but are still lost.
You're listening to Cleanse, Heal, Ignite podcast, and I'm your hostess, Diane Kaiser, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, former pro soccer player, transformational leader, holistic healer, and life purpose coach, helping you and your business awaken to your full potential. We are a transformation tribe of visionaries empowering, passion-quenching, heart-centered advice to wellness warrior leaders on self-love, nutrition, mindset, and divorcing perfectionism. Our mission is to help you laugh your way to a sexy belly, love your way to vitality, and live your life with purpose by sharing real talk and truth drops that will help you cleanse your body, heal your hormones, and ignite your life. Side effects of this podcast may include all-day energy, happy hormones, perfect poops, increased confidence, becoming your own best healer, and catching the self-love virus. There's currently no vaccination to protect you from this and no known cure. In most cases, listeners experience a strong desire to accept new challenges, ditch toxic people, follow their heart, and dance like no one's watching. If you experience moods happier than usual, live it unapologetically and share with your social media friends immediately.
Your gut is something that is always talking to you. And your gut is something that is the center of your immune system. It is where we convert information into energy. And what I'm always talking about is optimizing your natural beauty, your natural energy, and your God-given immunity. So today we're going to talk about all of those things because your center is the center of your universe and dictates everything. So I'm not going to jump right into all the statistics because we have a really, really deep and detailed presentation by Aliyah Khan Elhadi. Am I saying your name right?
Almost. Elhadi, Khan Elhadi. You got it.
Yeah. So speaking of roots, we're going to talk about the roots of your gut. So the roots of your gut determine the fruits of everything in your life. So we're going to talk today about many of the things that so many of you have worked on with your gut. And there's a lot of myths and mysteries and misconceptions out there with respect to how to heal the gut or how to treat the body in general. So we're not going to make any medical claims here because you guys probably know me already. I'm Diane Kaiser. I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I'm not a doctor, but my goal here and always is to help you be your own best doctor, be your own best friend, healer, and guru by learning to understand what the whispers and sometimes screams of your body are trying to tell you in the form of symptoms, which I believe are self-love coming from the soul and from your spirit, which is trying to help your soul become free from suffering, from symptoms, from sickness, and the element of stuckness which exists in our mind. Your mind and your gut are always communicating. And so you guys may know me already of the author of Killer Breast, which is my book back here. Some of you follow me because you're here to help your body detox, to cleanse your body. And it could be from the harmful effects of breast implants. It could be also from the harmful effects and the residue of having silver fillings in your mouth. Could be from having birth control or vaginal meshes. We're living in an extremely toxic world, unprecedented to any time ever in human history. And right now your guts are suffering because of it. Even mine, even as much work that I'm always doing, we really have to be ahead of and top of all of this so that we can always be cleansing. I call it ABC, always be cleansing. And people forget that when we go about detox protocols, a lot of these toxins end up in our gut to be disposed of, and we're not considering the gut too, or just detoxing, or we're just working on healing the gut, but we're not working on cleansing, or we're just working on healing hormones, but not realizing that our gut is a big part of why our hormones are imbalanced because of the toxic loads. Your body is always working in harmony, or at least it's trying to, and the symptoms of it is when your body is not in harmony and it's in disharmony. So today we're going to talk about the gut's impact of all of this, because many of you are doing candida cleanses. You're doing heavy metal detoxes, or maybe you're just doing liver flushes or gallbladder flushes or colon cleanses. Or maybe you're doing things like parasite cleanses, or maybe you're working on healing the gut or removing gluten. But there's a huge synergistic relationship on going through what's called a 5R protocol. We're going to talk about all of it today because so many of you have tried a lot of advanced things, but are still lost. So if you're here because you want to dive to the root of it, to really get to the heart of how to heal quickly, or how to, I call self-heal quickly, because we can't make any claims, today is a perfect time for you. So let's dive into this, because I've got several key points now. We've got a really great webinar for you today planned with a really great slideshow. So if this inspires you, we'll have the opportunity to share it with your friends later on, because it'll show up on my Cleanse, Heal, Ignite podcast. It will also be on my YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that. If you're on my list, you will also get a replay so that you can share the email with anybody. And I'll have a discount code at the end for you guys if you're interested in some of the things we're going to talk about today, so stay tuned to the end. And also, as usual, if you have any questions at all, use the little buttons on the bottom. There's a little Q&A section. If you guys have questions, we'll get to that in the very last 10 minutes. And if you have any comments as well, let us know. I'm curious too, as we have Aaliyah start today, what things you're here to learn. What types of things right now are you focused on and healing your gut, self-healing your gut? And what symptoms are you looking to resolve? And maybe even share what things that you have tried, because whenever I'm engaging here and we're having a conversation, I'm always pulling you guys into it with what I'm seeing in the chat and the thread, okay? So let's get started. Aaliyah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into becoming a gut goddess of multidimensional and multicultural practices?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm actually the lead clinical consultant at Biobotanical Research. So we're going to talk a lot about botanicals and how we can use those to help balance out the microbiome. My path is a little interesting of how I got into this career. I didn't start off with nutrition. Like yourself, I got sick. So I actually started off with about 15 years or so of being a clinical social worker. So I did a lot of work with addiction, mental health, and I was very interested in holistic health. Fast forward, I got sick and I couldn't find a doctor to understand what was going on in my body, and was told numerous times, oh, it's just in your head, or reduce your stress. And we couldn't really figure out what was going on. I lost the function of my hands for almost a year and a half. So it was pretty debilitating. And I decided to go down the route of nutrition, because I thought maybe it has something to do with how I fuel my body and how can I balance my gut. And so I went down the path of becoming a functional nutritional therapist. And then later on, I found myself being called over to Biobotanical Research to work with them. And it was a line that I had actually used personally. So it was something that really resonated with me. Botanicals helped balance my microbiome so that I could get back to health, could function. I had my hands back. And now I get to work with a lot of practitioners and advise them on how to work with their clients. So I'm pretty excited today to speak to your followers about gut health, because I know you talk a lot about, balancing that microbiome, detoxification, and exactly what you said earlier. A lot of people are doing one, but not the other. And so they're not getting this complete package, right? So we really want to do everything in harmony. And if we're doing a detox, well, we need to pay attention on what's happening in the gut. Or if we're paying attention with the gut, we also need a detox as well, because when we're balancing that gut off, we're going to be using different botanicals or different supplements, what have you, that create die-off. And then we can have really uncomfortable detoxification reactions. So we can mitigate that and make them less. So it's a more comfortable protocol that people are going to follow through with. And then they see lasting effects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing that we do is we tend to think, oh, well, I feel better, so I'm going to go back to eating or doing the very things that made me feel terrible in the beginning. So we tend to forget what the abuser of symptoms is. So it's like, okay, now I feel better, so I'm going to stop it altogether. And I think the most important thing is to understand that once you're never really off of a gut healing protocol. It's like always looking out for ourselves. And I think of this, our gut is like taking care of our baby, our own internal baby. It's our gut baby, and it can look like a baby and like 6 months pregnant when you're eating the wrong foods. Or maybe like if you're like me and just got back from Mexico and maybe brought in some kind of a parasite that made me feel terrible. And there's a lot of things that you guys can do. And I'll just start by saying before we get into the slides here, that there was a time I went to Peru, and I'm wondering if you who are listening to may have also heard it from somebody that, oh yeah, the only way you can get a parasite is when you travel the world. You go to other countries. I've been told that when I was a kid too. And that is one way. So one time I did go to Peru and I came back and I had a gnarly parasite known as Giardia. Yay, Giardia is so fun. And I went to the doctor because I had tried a lot of these things on my own as an alternative and holistic health practitioner myself. And none of them seemed to be working. So I went to the urgent care and I got a prescription. This was several years ago for Cipro. And Cipro is a really gnarly antibiotic that tends to rupture Achilles tendons, or connective tissues, et cetera. And while it may have been somewhat instrumental of getting rid of this parasite, I ended up rupturing my Achilles tendon months after. So the scary thing is that we're doing many things that we think are the best, is to go to your doctor, you get a stool test done, and that's all that you do. And then they go on a bug killing spree, but that's not all. That is not only not the only alternative and way to do it, it is the most destructive way to do it. So we can never say, don't listen to your doctor, don't talk to your doctor, don't go to a doctor, but we're going to present to you some other alternatives to look at today, such as the type of testing that we offer in my practice called it's GI, microbial stool testing, where we're looking at DNA analysis of these bugs. And then we're looking for not only just bugs in the presence of them, we're looking at infections, we're looking at imbalances, we're looking at immune system dysfunction, we're looking at intestinal barrier dysfunction, we're looking at immunocompromised clients who have a lot of viral underpinnings that are causing, or possibly the root cause of several of their autoimmune diseases. We're looking at imbalances of things like enzymes and bile production. And then we're looking also at the ratios of these things and inflammation markers, et cetera. So there's a lot, and we're going to dive into this. And so this is the kind of stuff that we both wish, going through our own sick stories, that we would have known before we got sick, but then again, we wouldn't have sought it out. So hopefully you're here because you have maybe been sick for a while and you're here to seek out another way. So let's get into it. Thank you for taking your sick story, Aaliyah, and turning it into a sovereignty route for all of us.
My pleasure. Let me just load up these slides for you guys. I don't know about your listeners, but I'm definitely a visual learner. So that's why I thought I would put something together for you. Just give me a second here and let's see if this loads up correctly for us.
And while this is loading, you guys, the things that we're going to talk about today too are many people, about 95% of my practice last year had H. pylori. Never have seen it that high in my life. And antibiotics are not the only way of going about this. We're going to talk about dysbiosis. We're going to talk about things that, how mood issues, hormone imbalances, and skin flare-ups originate in the gut. And as well as my favorite one, why is it so difficult to treat Candida? Because many people go on this really gnarly Candida cleanse, and it's never going to work if you're only going after one bug. So this is why you want to stay to the end, because lots of good stuff today.
And we've got a promo code for you guys too. So that's a great.
Yeah, be sure to stay at the end. The promo code, yes, exactly.
Are you guys seeing the full screen on your end? Awesome.
Over here.
Beautiful. So we're going to talk about exactly what we've just been talking about, balancing that microbiome and how that really is the root for having optimal health. I do have a little bit of a disclaimer. So I do work for biobotanical research, and we will be talking about their botanicals today. The FDA has not evaluated these statements or claims, so please know that this is not intended to help treat, prevent, or diagnose. This really is only for educational purposes. And I do encourage you to work with a qualified healthcare professional to, seek after some of those solutions that you are looking for to get to the root cause of your symptoms. So some of you may know this already and others don't. For those who don't know this fact, they are just mind blown by this. Human cells make up about 43% of our total body cell count, while microorganisms make up 57%. So, yep, we are more microorganisms than we are made up of human cells. So our skin and our mucosa, which is that membrane that lines the cavities of our body, those are covered by a wide range of microorganisms. So you can quickly see why we need to have a balance. So these organisms can be viruses, fungi, bacteria, parasites, as we've already talked about as well. And a lot of these do colonize in the GI tract. So balancing that will be the route to health and stability there too. Some of you might be familiar with epigenetics too. I thought I'd bring this into the conversation because a lot of people focus on their genes, which I think is a really interesting topic to look at. It's something that I've been well kind of versed in as well. But just because you're born with a dirty gene doesn't mean you are duped. So epigenetics is really what turns our genes on or off. And our microbiome has a huge potential to play a role in health or disease. So things like lifestyle, stress, exercise, sleep, behaviors, our mind frame. This can impact our microbiome. Toxic exposures. I think I recently heard 80% of our air quality, we are absorbing toxins all the time. So just like Diane was saying, is we need to constantly be detoxing because we live in a world full of toxins. Microbial infections, if we have these microorganisms that are problematic, they are going to alter our microbiome, lead to inflammation and chronic disease as well. Diet, so important. A lot of us, may have grown up, or perhaps we still are, eating that standard American diet. So taking steps to move away from that, to eat real food, to take the time to sit down, smell our food, chew our food. This is all going to play a huge role in your healing journey. And our nutrient status, right? If we aren't able to digest our food, we are not absorbing those nutrients. So you can be eating this great organic, meal, but if you're not in a rested to digest state, meaning you're eating when you're stressed or you're overly hungry, you're not going to absorb those nutrients. So always keep that in mind. One of my free tips and simplest tips to individuals when I was working with clients was smell your food, chew your food, and take 5 deep breaths before you start eating your food. And that at least will get you just into a digestive state. So our blood can go to our digestive tract rather than our extremities if we're in this flight or fight mode, which a lot of us, are in the life that we live. So I've talked a little bit about this already. I don't need to go through the full list, but these are some major factors that are going to play into your microbiome. So if you're experiencing joint pain, brain fog, these can be symptoms of a microbial imbalance. In fact, many of our health issues do begin in the gut. So, when I was talking about having lost the function of my hands and then being diagnosed with multiple autoimmune issues, it was my gut. That's really what I worked the most on, is getting my gut into place and being able to have open detoxification pathways. That really was the key to my success, and learning what my food triggers were too. Our body will give us messages, so we just need to listen. Sometimes we, slough them off with, I'm just getting old, or I just had a bad day. Well, no, these are messages, and they will scream louder if we don't listen. Stress, I will highlight this. This is a huge one. Stress is not only mental stress. We have physical stress. If you just went in for a surgery and your body's under repair from some damage, that's a stress. Planning a wedding, that's a happy stress, but it's still a stress. And microbial infections, a lot of people don't think about that one, but that's a stress on our system too. So this will alter our microbiome. It will alter our hormones, so it impacts our endocrine system, and it will alter our immune messaging as well. So keeping us healthy with that innate and adaptive immune system. Drugs, that's a huge piece too, right? So there's a lot of individuals who are on different pharmaceutical drugs, and that's where I'd say talk to your doctor, healthcare professional. If you're wanting to kind of move away from that, there's some ways to support that if possible. But things like protein pump inhibitors, NSAIDs like anti-inflammatories or birth control, antibiotics, these can present quite some damage to that microbiome. And sometimes there is a need for them. So then we just need to know, how do we support ourselves if we need to take these for some time while we're working on our root causes. Several other things in here too that are going to impact our microbiome: diet, lifestyle. So if we're having a lot of alcoholic beverages, allergies. So if you have some food sensitivities, sometimes we need to take those out of our diet for a little bit of time until we can have some more healing, some more symptom resolution, and then putting it back in. And if it doesn't sit well with us, then perhaps it's not something that we'll be able to tolerate, or we need to do a little more work before we can get that back into our diet. Intensive exercise too. This is a huge one for people. They would come to see me and they would tell me how they're doing these HIIT exercises, and they loved this high intensity workout, but their adrenals were shot. So if you're one of those folks too, think about more moderate exercise just while you're getting your body back into balance during that time. So I'm not sure how familiar your viewers, Diane, are with the microbiome, but I thought it might be worth going into what some of those layer functions are. And please add in too. I know you know your viewers' knowledge base too, as well. So think of the microbiome as having multi-layer system and 3 major components. They have more components, but I'm only going to break it down to 3 right now for ease of time. There's the mucosal layer, so you can see that up here. There's the epithelial layer, these cells. And then you have your immune cells just below that. The mucosal layer acts as a barrier to prevent harmful organisms, pathogenic organisms, antigens, food particles from getting into the epithelial cells and then getting into the bloodstream. So that's really its main goal here. It's one of the goals, I should say. I don't want to say it's the main goal, but it is one of the big goals is preventing anything harmful from coming into contact with those epithelial cells. Now, those epithelial cells, they actually have the role to keep microorganisms, toxins, undigested food from entering into that bloodstream. And they have tight junctions. So I kind of think of it like a fence. They're semi-permeable because it allows nutrients in and out of the body. But what happens when those tight cells get damaged, as you can see here over on the right side, organisms, pathogenic or beneficial, they can start flowing down into the bloodstream. That's where we start to see this immune response. And so that third component, that immune cells, that's where they discriminate between harmful, pathogenic, or beneficial, otherwise known as commensal, you might have heard that term, microorganisms, and then they'll mount an appropriate attack, which sounds great. Our body has this amazing science. But when that immune response continues repetitively, that's when we start to see damage of that barrier. And then the downside is we're going to have this vicious cycle of inflammation. And we're going to start to see food allergies, joint pain, brain fog, mood disorders, and then even autoimmune issues as well. So we really want to have these tight junctions intact. And there's certainly a lot of ways that we can support our body. And we will talk about those solutions too. I want to talk a little bit about what happens when that microbial barrier gets damaged, that mucosal barrier, pardon me. We can see something that's called microbial shift disease, and that occurs when the barrier system of the local mucosa, so whether it's in the GI tract, or we might have this in our vaginal tract or oral cavity, we have mucosa in several different areas of our body, but that barrier system breaks down, now these organisms, antigens can get into our bloodstream. So as I mentioned here, we have a few different local mucosas that we can consider. So GI tract, nasal, oral. I focus a lot on oral as well as GI, especially, if we're going to be talking about Candida, a lot of individuals are only addressing the GI tract, but we really want to pay attention to the oral microbiome as well, because we can re-inoculate infection over and over again because we're swallowing a lot of saliva. And I'll get into that as well. And then when we have that breakdown, we start to see that microbial shift disease. So something that could have been occurring in the mouth is now occurring in the GI tract. And we can start to see a cascade effect of a lot of inflammation. So common denominator, bad bugs. So if we have an imbalanced microbiome, as we can see here, this will lead to a breakdown of the mucosa, and then an increase in inflammatory concerns, and then we're going to have poor quality of life. So we want to make sure we balance out these bugs and we can prevent this from happening. So one thing you might have heard some individuals talk about is lipopolysaccharides. And if you haven't, I want to tell you a little bit about what it is, because it's something we want to be aware of. Lipopolysaccharides, otherwise known as LPS, is found in the outer shell of gram-negative bacteria. So we organically have gram-negative bacteria, and also some of the harmful organisms that that are in our system will have that gram-negative bacteria. So the outer shell has that lipopolysaccharide, which is an endotoxin, meaning that it can cause that chronic inflammation. It's a component of biofilms, and we're going to talk a lot about biofilms because I think that is key to addressing root causes of symptoms and keeping them from coming back, because we can address harmful organisms that are planktonic. That's when they're free floating. But if we don't address what's hiding behind that biofilm, we can often see reseeding of that infection and symptoms kind of come and go. I describe it like a roller coaster. You feel great all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden it goes back down to where you were, in the depths of the worst time of your symptoms. And it's likely because those biofilms haven't been addressed. LPS can also be a huge cause of damage to our blood-brain barrier, can deposit amyloid plaque, and it's really a major factor in autoimmune diseases. So if you have an autoimmune disease or you're on the verge of being diagnosed with one, you want to pay attention to lipopolysaccharides and how to reduce that in your bloodstream. So these are some systemic conditions that all of you might be way too familiar with, unfortunately. Maybe you're even experiencing some of them yourself. I won't read through the full extent of them here, but you can start to see very quickly that the GI microbiome plays a huge role in health and disease. And some of these things people, never even thought of. With Alzheimer's, they weren't seeing it as linked to the microbiome, but now they are. Parkinson's, mood disorders, I was trained several years ago. I don't want to age myself too much, but I was trained to think that mood disorders had to do with an imbalance of endocrine disruptors and what's the word here? Oh, see, I forgot. I have a little brain fog myself. But anyhow, I was taught to believe that it had nothing to do with the microbiome. Why address that? But I've seen such huge changes in individuals when we start to address diet, lifestyle, and balancing their microbiome. We've seen decrease depression rates and anxiety, which is really, really exciting for me to see. So biofilms, if they're new to you, let's talk about that. Biofilms are communities of microorganisms. So that's one important thing to understand. If you're doing any type of work where you're going to break through a biofilm, you're going to get exposure to multiple organisms. So you can have heavy metals, endocrine disruptors, bacterial, fungal, viral, all living in this biofilm. And the biofilm itself is considered an extracellular polymeric substance. You might have heard it in the literature as EPS. It's a very sticky substance. I like to kind of think of it as an invisibility cloak or a force field where your immune system can't really understand what's going on beneath there and can't address them appropriately. So these organisms will continue to grow and proliferate. They don't stay neatly tucked beneath that biofilm. Unfortunately, they do break off eventually back into their planktonic free-floating stage. And that's where we start to see that reseeding of infection and symptoms arising again. So important to note, if we are doing any kind of work with biofilms, we want to make sure we're using a binder because we are going to be unleashing a lot of these organisms, their microbial debris. So as antimicrobials go to work with organisms that are beneath the biofilm, they're going to release something called die-off, which can, lead to flu-like symptoms or exacerbate your symptoms as well. So we like to use a binding agent of some sort to help excrete those toxins out of the body. And we will talk about that too when we start talking about some solutions. 80% of microbial infections will develop a biofilm at the beginning of its onset in as little as 2 weeks. So very quickly, these biofilms can create. And also, when these biofilms are dismantled, very quickly, they can reform within as little as a few days to weeks. So we want to make sure that not only we're addressing the biofilm, but we're preventing it from regrowing. And there's certainly a handful of botanicals that do that. Very interesting. I think some people are mind blown when they hear about this. Biofilms can resist up to 5,000 times of the antibiotic concentration that it would normally need to resolve that infection. So if you have an organism behind that biofilm and we're trying to attack it with antibiotics, it may not reach it, likely won't reach it. And that's where we start to see antibiotic resistance coming into place. And as I alluded to earlier, LPS, harmful, dangerous, causes inflammation. This is often a component of biofilms. And when we have these biofilms break off, and if we have leaky gut, they then get into our bloodstream. And so we start to see systemic inflammation occurring, that joint pain, that brain fog, those mood disorders coming into play. So biofilms can be formulated by a handful of different organisms. These are just a few examples I wanted to put up here because I thought you guys might be familiar with some of them if you've seen them on one of those stool tests. E. coli, Pseudomonas, Strep, Klebsiella. I've seen that one come in a lot. It's one that I'm very familiar with because I had it and I needed to address it. E. coli, I see this a ton when I'm helping individuals manage their symptoms around urinary tract infections. We've seen E. coli come up and we've seen a lot of botanicals that can address it too. So certainly these organisms can produce them in abundance. Candida, which Diane already brought up, it will actually produce a lot of biofilms. So Candida is one of those organisms. It's a yeast species. This will produce a lot of biofilm. And it can be, we can find Candida in our esophagus, genitals, intestine, scalp, if we have that flaky scalp, oral thrush. So sometimes young new babies will have oral thrush, or even adults if we have Candida colonized in the oral cavity. And we all have Candida, The problem is when it becomes invasive. So low levels, that's normal, but when it becomes invasive, that's when it becomes problematic. And in fact, Candida, it's interesting how it grows. We'll see here, it grows these, where'd my mouse go? These tentacles, otherwise known as hyphae. And then they can start to invade the mucosal lining. So that mucosal barrier that we were talking about can penetrate, damage the mucosal barrier, make it a lot more difficult to get rid of it. And then we start to see leaky gut, inflammation, and systemic conditions as well. So this is actually a picture here of just Candida itself. And then you can start to see that biofilm forming here. And remember that biofilm acts like a force field. So your immune system can't go to action because it doesn't know what's happening beneath there. Meanwhile, Candida is continuing to replicate and multiply and grow and become more and more invasive. So this is, I wanted to bring this into our conversation because a lot of people talk about SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's prevalent, a lot of us have it. But I think SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, also needs some attention here too. So these are some symptoms that you might be familiar with. If you're experiencing SIFO, you might have that brain fog, a lot of food sensitivities, ear congestion, it might feel like your ears are always clogged, potentially even ringing, headaches, sleep disturbances. You might get that oral thrush on your tongue, or perhaps even vaginal discharge from the yeast overgrowth as well. So something to think about with balancing the microbiome, not only bacterial, we want to think fungal as well. Some sources of toxicity that come from the biofilm, because a lot of people think, well, you describe the biofilm as an invisibility cloak. Is it going to keep those organisms neatly organized and tight behind it? Unfortunately not. So that biofilm is going to have the lipopolysaccharides and metabolites. So these organisms that are harmful to us, they create metabolites, which we can sometimes measure through different testing methods. Those will be continuously produced beneath that biofilm. And then our immune system is not responding appropriately. So that can lead to chronic inflammation. And then we can start to see inflammatory damage to our hepatocytes. The hepatocytes are cells in our liver, and they play a pivotal role in metabolism, detoxification, and protein synthesis. So we want to make sure that we're not damaging those. They're really important for our health. The biofilms also retain toxins, so heavy metals, endocrine disruptors. So for anybody's having hormonal issues, this is something we want to take into consideration, is what's happening behind that biofilm. I won't go through the full list here because your viewers can also read through it. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. This is a life cycle of a biofilm. So if anybody's not familiar with it, I love this picture because it shows how they grow. The organisms do something called quorum sensing. That's where they speak to each other. They quorum sense, and then once they find each other, they attach to the tissues, they continue to grow. And then once they have a large enough colony, they can excrete that extracellular polymeric substance, that biofilm. And now they're kind of protected and they're hanging out and multiplying. They do continue to mature, but they hit a disbursement detachment phase. And that's where you see the roller coaster of symptoms. You might not feel the symptoms as much when they're beneath that biofilm, but they do open up. They go into their free-floating planktonic form. And that's where we start to see recurrence of that infection or the symptoms. As I mentioned, very quickly, they can reform. So these organisms often have something called flagella or swarming motility. So they can readily move around the body, moving away from the immune system. And then they do their quorum sensing, and then they recreate this whole biofilm. So it's a continuous cycle. This on the bottom here, I put this in here because I knew we were going to talk about Candida. So I thought I'd bring in one of the pilot studies done with Biocidin, one of the formulas we'll talk about. This green blob here at 0 hours is a Candida biofilm. So what our researchers did is they introduced 1/4 of the amount of Biocidin into that Petri dish, and they wanted to see what would happen. So they continued to watch it. First hour, it's completely gone. Now, I mentioned biofilms come back very quick, so they continue to watch it. And at 24 hours, nothing came back. So that was very exciting for us to understand. Now, this is a Petri dish, so we're not going to see results in 24 hours in our human body. We've got a lot more nooks and crannies and complex systems. So I would say you're looking likely at a minimum of 3 months, sometimes longer, depending how invasive that infection is and where it is in your body as well. But certainly I would say at a minimum, you're looking at around 3 months. And that is with titration too. So when we use Biocidin, it's a very potent formula that we want to titrate. And sometimes if you're not familiar with it, I do recommend working with a healthcare professional that knows how to use it, and they can guide you through that as well. This is another biofilm study we were looking at. This is, so Candida yeast, these are bacterial. So we looked here at, what do we got? Not Klebsiella, pardon me, Pseudomonas aeruginosa and E. coli down here. 2 common bugs in the pathogenesis of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And as I mentioned, E. coli, huge contributor to urinary tract infections. Sometimes I see Klebsiella come up as well, but I often see E. coli. When we introduced Biocidin again in a Petri dish, we wanted to see what would happen. With Pseudomonas aeruginosa, it comes down very quick. And this is also a bug that is heavily contributed to upper respiratory infections for those individuals that have cystic fibrosis. With E. coli, it took a little bit longer, but both at 24 hours, you can see the planktonic, which is that free floating form of the organism, and the biofilm have very little cell viability. So this really excites us because we get to see that now Biocide is not only being effective with yeast species, but we're also seeing it with certain bacterial species as well. So I always want to know how and why something works, because that's how my brain works. So I thought I'd break down some of the botanicals that can help with preventing the biofilms from recreating. So the first thing is that inhibition of the quorum sensing. So remember I was saying that's how organisms speak to each other. They're communicating through that quorum sensing. If they can't speak to each other, they can't find each other and they can't grow a colony. If they don't have a big enough colony, they can't excrete that biofilm. So a handful of botanicals like garlic, oregano, bilberry, golden seal, bladderwhack, these will stop their communication. That initial attachment phase to the tissues, a handful of botanicals will also prevent that. If the organisms don't attach to the tissues, we have an easier chance, better chance of getting rid of them. That swarming motility. So as we open up the biofilm, we want to make sure we can stop these organisms from getting away quickly. So we can inhibit that flagella, that swarm motility. So now the organisms don't have the ability to flee from your immune response or from the antimicrobials that are also being introduced into your system. Of course, we use antimicrobials to address the organisms too. And probably one of the biggest questions I get, maybe more so from practitioners, but some really savvy consumers is, what about resistance? Because we can build up a resistance to antibiotics. We can build up a resistance to antimicrobials. But one of the beneficial things with a lot of botanicals is a handful of them will actually stop that efflux pump. It will prevent them from shooting out any type of antimicrobial. So there's a handful here, echinacea, gentian, shiitake, grapeseed, olive oil, or pardon me, not olive oil, olive leaf more particularly. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the efflux pump just so everybody has an idea. I have a diagram, it better describes it. I kind of describe this as, this is the cell, this is the organism, this is the efflux pump. I like to think of it like a mouth. It allows things in and out, nutrients in, toxins out, antimicrobials out, anything that harms the organism, it will pump it out. So this is a mechanism, in addition to biofilms, to create antibiotic resistance. And it will also pump out some antimicrobials. But if the antimicrobials can inhibit and shut down this pump, like tannins, berberine, different phenolics, it will prevent the organism from being able to pump out the antimicrobials so that they can go to work, whether or not the organism knows it's at threat. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see a lot of botanical formulations not building up a resistance to certain bugs. So I wanted to break down 2 different terms with botanicals. So there's bacteriostatic and bactericidals. 2 very different things. Bacteriostatic means we're using an agent to inhibit or slow down the growth or reproduction of the organism. Bactericidals kill the bacteria. So they're different botanicals have different mechanisms of action. So berberine, golden seal, gentian, these will be ones that have that slowing down the replication. And then, a lot of people are familiar with, do I have oregano in here? I don't, but it's actually, I would add it under the kill agent here. So several different organisms have that. The benefit to me, though, is having a combination of botanicals, because if we use just straight oregano, it actually concerns me because we are going to decimate that microbiome. We're going to kill off a lot of the good stuff along with the bad stuff. So we want to make sure we're having balance. And that's where I like using formulas rather than solo agents themselves. I did have one in here. So we can see here from biocidal killing combination formulas. They can support the clearance of toxins through drainage. So drainage is another huge topic that I think we could spend a very long time talking about, but I'll lightly touch on it, is we want to make sure our pathways to our lymph, liver, and kidneys are open. We want to excrete the toxins. Otherwise, if those drainage pathways aren't open, we'll start to see them recirculating, and that will make us feel pretty achy pretty quick. Biocidal formulations will also reduce inflammation. So some formulas will have anti-inflammatory properties as well to help support repairing damage that leaky gut. And as I alluded to in the last slide, having a synergistic blend is a lot more desirable than using a solo agent. So when we're doing micro amounts of botanicals, we often don't see stress on our organs. And so that's really one of the reasons why I love working with Biocidin. So the main message is if you can prevent these damages between our epithelial cells, you can then ensure that we're having healthy life. So by preventing that leaky gut or repairing that leaky gut, we can see joint health, immune modulation, liver health, brain health. Our mood and our focus is going to be so much more clear. Thyroid, I've done a lot of work for myself with thyroid just by balancing my microbiome. So I want to talk to you guys about solutions. We talked a lot about problems and it sounds very grim, but there is a light side to this. We do have the ability to bounce back. Our body is so amazing in that sense. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Biocidin has to offer in that regard. So Biocidin, if you haven't heard about it, it is a proprietary blend of 17 botanicals and essential oils. It's designed to target the whole GI tract and support the delicate balance between harmful and beneficial microorganisms in the microbiome. So it can support, we have several different applications. We're going to focus just on GI here, but we also have applications to also address the oral cavity and systemic health as well, which I'll try to allude to a little bit if time allows us. I wouldn't say few. There's several ways to talk about Biocidin, but these are my main highlights. It's a potent, broad spectrum antimicrobial, for lack of a better description, that will help clear multiple classes of organisms. So if we do a GI map and we see that there's a fungal overgrowth and a bacterial overgrowth, I like using Biocide because I don't have to pick one formula and then get another formula and another one. This one will help kind of across the board. It will disrupt and dismantle biofilm formations because, as I mentioned, those biofilms help reseed that chronic infection. We have some clinical research showing the immune modulatory of the actual formula. So we'll talk about that with the throat spray of how we can raise secretory IgA levels. And obviously, a lot of the botanicals will have anti-inflammatory effects too. So it's really a very jam-packed formula. I do want to highlight it is a potent formula. So if you're having chronic symptoms, you've been chronically ill, low and slow is my mantra when using this formula. You do want to slowly titrate up rather than going into a maximum serving, because I know a lot of individuals want to just feel better, but going right maximum serving can certainly bring some uncomfortable reactions to you guys. So one of the things I love about this line, not only because I used it on myself and a lot of clients and found it beneficial, is a lot of research has gone into this line. And I really like the story actually of how it started. It was back in the late 80s that Dr. Rachel Fresco designed this formula. She has a background in traditional Chinese medicine, so you'll kind of see that woven in and out of the full line. One day she was approached by a practitioner in the San Francisco Bay Area asking if she had a formula that they could utilize to support some of their really ill patients. And she didn't have a formula for human consumption at that time. She was actually working with holistic veterinarian clinics because she has a huge heart for animals. So she designed and adapted what she was using on some of the animals and handed out the bottle to a handful of practitioners in that San Francisco Bay Area. They loved what they saw, and they, unbeknownst to Dr. Fresco, actually sent the bottle off to Great Smokies Labs, which is now Genova Diagnostics. And she got a call one day, and it was a little unsettling because she had no idea who this Martin Lee, the director of this Genova, was, calling her and asking her what was in her formula. And she thought, what? He said, are you Dr. Rachel Fresco? Yes. And he said, what is in your formula? It is killing everything. She said, is that a good thing? And he said, that is an excellent thing. He said, can I put it on a comprehensive diagnostic stool analysis panel? And at that time, this is the late 80s. Functional medicine really wasn't there quite yet. And she said, I don't even know what that is. And she gave him permission. put it on the panel. It was tested over 250,000 patients, and it came out being the most highly sensitive substance, meaning that it was addressing the organisms that these individuals had on their stool tests. So from there, he basically said, you better create a name for this product because I'm going to be sending people your way. So I love that the formula was actually created out of a need, and that's really how she's actually designed her full line. So this is the flagship product, Biocide Liquid. It comes in capsules as well. I am pretty partial to the liquid. You very rarely will see me sending anybody out the door with the capsules, just because, again, translocation, as I talked about that microbial shift disease, how what's happening in the oral cavity can go downstream into the GI tract. I like the liquid because it will coat the mouth and the esophagus and then get into the GI tract. So I think it's really key in that regard. The liquid is a lot easier to titrate. So as I mentioned, low and slow is going to be your mantra. I typically like to start with 1 drop, see how the individual does, and then we'll increase that 2 times a day. And I eventually will work them up, usually up to about 15 drops twice a day, depending on the individual. If it's a child, certainly we do different servings based on their weight. If you are opposed to taking the drops, you can use the capsules, but keep in mind 1 capsule equals 5 drops. And that might be too much for some of you to start out with if you have a very complex symptoms going on. I see that more so with individuals with autoimmune, Lyme, mold. Those are my more complex folks that tend to have the need to do a really, really slow titration. 20 minutes before your meal is best for absorption. So the way I get people thinking about this is I say, when you are prepping your meal, it's time to take your Biocide. Just gets them into a nice routine of when to take it. So usually I'll do before breakfast and before dinner. I find most individuals can manage that. So we talked about SIFO, and now we're going to talk about SIBO. So that's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This was a pilot study that Dr. Danielle Lewis ran for us out of the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. And what she had her individuals do who presented with SIBO, she did a 2-month protocol with them, no dietary changes, which I certainly wouldn't recommend. I think it's really key to have some dietary changes to have lasting impact. But for the purpose of the study and compliance, that's how they designed it. These individuals took Biocide Liquid, the formula that I just showed you guys, and GI Detox, our binding agent, which I will show you in a bit here. After 8 weeks, she retested. All the patients came back either saying they had a huge reduction in their symptom load or complete elimination. One thing she noted, though, was those who had methane-producing SIBO, they weren't really seeing much of a reduction. So she retested and added in, she didn't retest, she did another 8 weeks, and she added in olive virex, which is an olive leaf formula, in addition to the Biocide Liquid and the GI Detox. After another 8 weeks, she retested it. At that point, there was a 75% reduction in the methane-producing bacteria. So if we see any kind of methane markers elevated on our GI map or GI tests, I would say you definitely want to add in a bottle of that olive virex. And sometimes even so with individuals, if I can't test because, perhaps financing is an issue and we want to save money for treatment, that's where I will say, let's just put them both in and see what we can, what resolution we can see from there. But certainly I do like to test whenever possible because it gives us a baseline of where to start. So some individuals will say, what does Biocide do to the microbiome? And I'm really happy when I hear that question because I then can see people are thinking about what kind of damage will this potential, formula do to me. Just like antibiotics, we should be thinking about that with antimicrobials as well. We suspected Biocide wouldn't have any damage, but we wanted to put some research to that. So we've done some pilot studies. I think we've now had 25 individuals come through. This one's just showing 4 at the moment, but very comparable results. These individuals were on an 8-week protocol, used Biocide Liquid and GI Detox. And what we noticed is that their beneficials, their probiotics actually increased. So we were seeing a slight elevation in them. With some of them, we actually saw a huge elevation with Akkermansia. We were very excited to see that go up because this is one of those keystone species that you can't really take a probiotic for. And Akkermansia is really helpful in for diversifying your microbiome. In fact, I think I have another slide here. I do. So Akkermansia in the literature is seen to help with waist to hip ratio, insulin sensitivity. So obviously with obesity, that comes into play. Our total cholesterol and LDL. And as I already alluded to, it will help diversify our microbiome, and diversity is key when balancing that microbiome. So really exciting for us to see that Biocide is not impacting those beneficials, and in fact is actually helping them proliferate. So I also wanted to talk about Biocide and LSF just because we're talking about Candida. So I like to use liquid anytime there's concerns in the GI tract. I think it's really nicely coated the mouth and the esophagus and gets into the GI tract. But if we have systemic symptoms coming up, perhaps we're having the rash on the skin, that joint pain, that brain fog, then I'm thinking we might also need to do some systemic support. So oftentimes I'll start with the liquid, and sometimes I'll graduate over to the LSF. Sometimes I'll start with the LSF depending on the case. This is my go-to for anything that needs to go systemic or topical. This one's a little more potent than the Biocide liquid, so keep that in mind. 1 pump equals 5 drops, so titration is key. This one I like to start off with 1 pump, see how the person does, and then we'll slowly titrate them up. Typically I'll go up to about 3 pumps 2 times a day, and that can take a course of weeks. I've had one individual I was working with, it took me 2 months to get him up to that. And then I've had some individuals that actually won't even be able to get to that maximum, and that's okay, we'll get them close to that. If I'm doing any kind of topical application with the LSF, I would say leave it on and allow it to penetrate into the skin for a good 20 minutes before you wash it off. This one is a liposome, so I like to have people take it underneath their tongue. So squirt it under the tongue, hold it for about a minute, and then go ahead and swallow. Also best to take on that empty stomach before your meal. So when you're prepping your meal, take your Biocide. That's how that one goes. This is a case study of a topical application for Candida. Actually, this individual was not my patient, but I'm going to try to best represent what I heard the practitioner do with her. They had her first on a bottle of Biocide liquid for 1 month. Then they moved her over to the LSF because this is systemic, right? So we've now gone past the GI tract, and now we are also into the bloodstream and seeing it flush to the skin. So they moved her over to the LSF. She was also taking fluoromyces and a GI detox. And then in the last 3 weeks of the protocol, they decided to do a nightly mask where they would put Biocide LSF topically on her face, and they left it on for about 20 to 30 minutes before she washed it off. And she did that about 3 to 5 times a week. And this is her before, 3 weeks after. Certainly there's still some work to do here. I would not stop. But these are the photos that she shared with me. So I wanted to pass them along to you guys as well, just to see how we can start to see some of that healing occur. So secretory IgA, we were talking about immune modulation, right? I said we had some clinical studies on immune modulation. We studied a group of elite college athletes. And the reason why we chose college athletes is because they tend to have suppressed immune system after workout and really high cortisol levels. So an opportune time for them to catch an infection. What we did is we brought in the college athletes, we swabbed the back of the throat. I shouldn't say I didn't do it. This was at a university, but they swabbed the back of their throats to measure their baseline of their secretory IgA levels. Gave them 3 sprays of the Biocide into the back of the throat. That's about a single serving for an adult. For a kid, I would probably just do 1 spray. And then they had them work out for half an hour. A little bit of a rest period. And then 1 hour after that initial throat spray, they did another swab. And that's where they saw an increase of 66% of their secretory IgA levels. So showing that they have this immune modulation. So this is something that I actually use all the time, this throat spray. If I'm out and about and on the go, you will see me spraying that. When I have my niece and nephew come out, I'm like, I hand them bottles when they're going back to school. This is what they get. It's essentially 40% Biocide and 60% alcohol. It is suspended in the alcohol to allow the botanicals to dry into the oral pharynx. So really it is designed to help support upper respiratory health. This one does not have systemic effects, so I don't have concern with titration. This one is very easy for people to use. I hand it out to people who don't understand titration, and I'm not concerned they're going to have any type of a negative reaction there. You can use it topically. I've rarely used it topically. I've used it in a pinch. Actually, no, I used it in a pinch when I was, I took my nephew camping, and he had got swimmer's ear, and we were only gone for a day. So I didn't have a lot of stuff with me, but I never leave home with my throat spray. And so he told me that his ear was bothering him, and I knew we were out swimming. So I said, okay, lie down on your side, bud. And I gave him a couple of sprays into the ear. And, an hour later, he was ready to go swimming again. So it really did help out in that situation. I suspect the alcohol absorbed the excess fluids, and then the anti-inflammatory botanicals helped reduce some of that pounding he was complaining about. if I'm using this prophylactically, I'm using it a few times throughout the day. If I'm using it, if I got concerned that I might have been exposed to something, based on the clinical research that I just showed you guys, I use it every single hour until the symptoms go away. And sometimes I'll pair it up too with Olivirex, which is one of the other formulas that I'll talk about here in a minute. Megacidin is actually one of our newest products. This is also a throat spray. So same thing, 40% Biocidin, 60% alcohol. In fact, it's the exact same ingredients as Biocidin, but they've added in 2 spores. So they added in the Bacillus subtilis and the Bacillus coagulans. And that's really to help increase the beta defensin. That study was done, I believe, in rabbits. So I'm not sure how it corresponds to humans at this point. I haven't seen that research, but I suspect we'll probably see some elevation in that beta defense. And so we're just priming our immune system. We're helping support the upper respiratory health. So this is one that I reach for now, that it has those extra goodies in there when I'm feeling really under the weather. It's not my day-to-day go-to one, because it does come at a little bit of a tiny bit of a higher price point. So I like the traditional throat spray for daily use, and this is my go-to when I need a little extra oomph in my support. So oral biofilms. I bring this into our conversation, even though we're talking about GI health, because a lot of people forget it's one big long tube. So what happens upstream goes downstream. You know, we swallow what? We swallow a liter of saliva a day. And within that saliva, we have 1 milliliter, of saliva will have about, I think it was 100 million organisms. I might have that on another slide, so I'll confirm in a second here. But we can reintroduce organisms to our GI tract quite easily just by swallowing that saliva, especially if we have low stomach acid, right? So we want to make sure we're addressing that oral cavity. The other thing to think about is our epithelial cells, which I spoke about in the GI tract, they do turn over. They have a life cycle. But in the mouth, our teeth provide a non-shedding surface. So biofilms accumulate them very quickly. Organisms love to hang out there. You know, if you get the fuzzies teeth midday or at the end of day, that's a biofilm. And especially if somebody says, I don't know what a biofilm is. Well, if you've had a tooth cleaning and they say you got some plaque, that is a biofilm. So plaque is a biofilm in the oral cavity. So we want to make sure we're addressing that so it's not going downstream into our GI tract. This is a biofilm on a toothbrush bristle. This is it magnified. The first time I saw this, it kind of grossed me out. I was like, excuse me, I need to go brush my teeth now. And it also made me think, I need to go change my toothbrush head. So that's something else to think about. You know, if we're dealing with something like H. pylori, change out your toothbrush head. And if you have H. pylori, probably the people in your household have it too, because it's highly communicable. So change out the toothbrushes, stop sharing foods until you can get that under control and ensure that you're not passing it back and forth to each other. So 77% of Americans over the age of 30 will have periodontal disease or gingivitis. I do have it here. So 1 milliliter, 10 to the 8 of microorganisms. So we're swallowing a lot of organisms, and we swallow a liter a day. So that's a lot of microorganisms going downstream. 700 species at least that we're starting to see in the mouth. So again, we just want to address that.
This is 1 liter. You're saying we swallow this?
We swallow that.
We swallow this every day.
Every day.
Wow.
So if we've got Candida in our mouth, it's going downstream into our GI tract. So
that's huge.
And actually, that's a great segue into this study here. This was a study that essentially looked at Candida and how it is colonized from the mouth into the GI tract. So these individuals had their participants increase their oral hygiene, so tongue scraping, flossing, and especially they had them brushing after every single meal. And what they found was those who brushed after every single meal had a dramatic drop in their stool levels of Candida. So those who only brushed once a day, their Candida levels didn't really drop in their stool, but those who did saw that drop. So do I think brushing alone is going to address that overgrowth? Probably not, but I do think it's part of the equation, and we're already brushing our teeth. So not a hard thing to do. Let's just up our game, maybe even use a toothpaste that might help prevent the growth of Candida as well.
And also a toothbrush that's not made of plastic bristles.
Right. I won't go too much into this. This could take a whole conversation. In fact, I do have a whole presentation on oral health. But I think it's important for people to know that in less than 1 minute after an oral procedure, including flossing, that an organism can reach different parts of the body. So heart, lungs, and go right into our bloodstream. So when I'm doing any kind of oral work, I definitely like to use Dentalcidin, which is one of the products I'll speak to you in a moment here, because I want to clean up that oral ecology before I'm having any work done. And in the past, when I did have bleeding gums, I would actually use Dentalcidin before and after my flossing, to prevent that translocation of the organism going down into our bloodstream. So toothpaste, this is one of the options out there available. So it's 20% Biocidin. It is a therapeutic grade toothpaste. So it does come at a little bit of a higher price point. So I always tell people, stretch your dollars where you can. You only need a pea-sized amount of this toothpaste. Very potent. It's in a very natural-based formula. In fact, Dr. Fresco designed this from somebody, I think it was a naturopath who was using her product. They had put it on their toothbrush bristle, just the Biocidin formula itself, and was going back to the dentist. And the dentist said, what have you done? Like, your teeth are great, your gums are great. And so she came back to Dr. Fresco saying, I've just been squirting your LSF on my toothbrush. Like, think about making a toothpaste. And Dr. Fresco said, well, I can do that. Let me just find a natural toothpaste. And so away she went. She found a base that she really liked. Has a little bit of zeodent silica in there, so very gentle abrasion to the teeth. Some say it will actually help promote whitening. Perhaps that's the case. I've never really looked at my before and after, so I'm not sure. But it will help reduce that biofilm formation. So one of my favorite things about this toothpaste is that midday, my teeth do not feel fuzzy. I would love to say I have time to brush my teeth midday, but I haven't. And so I found, because I'm in Canada, so it takes me a little bit longer sometimes to get the product. If I run out of this toothpaste and I move over to my other one, which is still a really decent one, midday I get fuzzies on my teeth and I can't stand that anymore. So my teeth feel fresh and clean all day long. Some people will say it feels like they had a cleaning at the oral hygienist's office. It's not a reason to skip your cleaning. That's very different, but certainly you'll still feel very slick and clean. It's one that I will use with all age groups too. So if you're a mama and you have little kids, this is one that I use with my very young niece and nephew, and they love it. They tell me it's not too spicy. So it's a very light minty feel for those folks. If somebody's having periodontal concerns, I would bring in Dentalcidin LS. So this is a liposomal version, very similar to Biocidin LSF, but we've added in CoQ10 and quercetin to help with supporting the oral tissue repair of the gum line. And just like the toothpaste, there's some clove and myrrh in there, and that will help suppress that biofilm formation. So keeping the mouth very clean. The way I like to use this one is 1 to 2 pumps into the mouth, swish it around vigorously for a few minutes, and then spit it out. No need to rinse, but you do want to spit it out because you are cleaning up the oral ecology of your mouth. So you don't want to swallow those organisms because you're burdening your liver with that. So go ahead and spit. And again, I use this one with all age groups. I sometimes tend to avoid toddlers because they like to swallow everything. It does taste good, but you eventually might upset your stomach with some of the botanicals like the peppermint. You wouldn't need to call poison control or anything like that, but you might get a little bit of a tummy ache if they continuously swallow this. In a pinch, I've actually swallowed it when I was at a conference. I needed to freshen up my breath, so I gave it a little swig, but it's not something I do often. These are some before and afters using Biocidin LSF. The reason why it wasn't with Dentalcidin LS is because we hadn't created it yet. Dr. Rothschild is a dentist who had essentially worked with us in supporting a handful of his patients with overgrowth of organisms, as you can see here. He had his folks do a 4-week trial where they would use Biocidin LSF after their meals, swish it around, spit it out. And after that 4 weeks, he saw a huge reduction in the organisms. So reduced gram-negative rods, spirochetes, and essentially he was one who helped us design the Dentalcidin LS from there. So again, if we're having oral complications, I'd say let's try doing something easy. We're already brushing our teeth. Let's just change out our toothpaste and toothbrush and see if that does the case for us. So as I mentioned earlier, binders, we want to definitely bind because as we're opening up these biofilms, we are going to get some of the cellular debris that's coming out of them. We want to bind to the heavy metals. We want to bind to the metabolites, that die-off that the organisms are going to excrete to help ease the protocol. If you have constipation, please, please, please work on your bowels first. We want to make sure you're pooping. So make sure you have that detoxification pathway open. Certainly, sometimes it's just hydration or fiber, using magnesium. There's a handful of different solutions that you can temporarily use to get those bowels going. The way I like to use GI detox is at bedtime. So if you're not taking any medication, supplements, or you're not eating before bed, that's a great time to take it. 1 to 2 capsules, usually I start out with a full glass of water, because you do want to stay hydrated, because all binders can have a drying effect. This one is a layered binding agent. So it's got zeolite clay, activated charcoal, a little bit of humic fulvic acid, which is lovely for that pesticide absorption. What else we got in there? Some MMST silica, an additional binding agent. A little bit of apopectin and aloe. So that's going to help with that drying effect that can come with binders. And if you are one of those individuals that tends to be on the constipated side, you can even open the capsule. Or if you're giving it to a child, you can open a capsule. I make spooky shots for them, so they think it's fun, and that way they'll take it for me. But please remember, empty stomach. This one will bind to whatever's in your GI tract. So we don't want it to bind to your nutrients that you're eating, or if you're on a prescription of any kind or other supplements, has to be away from those. So Olivirax, this is the formula that was used in the SIBO pilot study. It's a very potent formula. It contains oleoprin. If you did a very quick Google search on oleoprin, you'll see several different benefits, one of them being antiviral. So I'll bring this one in for several different reasons. I like to use it for seasonal support. I like to bring it in if there's multiple co-infections going on and we're concerned about the symptoms and trying to get that into check. I do like to bring one product in at a time, however, so that way I can see how somebody's reacting to that product. Or if they're experiencing a lot of die-off, that means I want to pull back on the amount that I'm giving them and slowly titrate it so that they aren't having too much die-off that contributes to some negative symptoms. This one you can take with Biocidin, so you can take it before your meal. But if you experience any kind of digestive upset or nausea, that can come from the oleoprin. So take it with your meal if you're one of those folks who tends to be a little more on the sensitive stomach side. This is one I wouldn't give to children. I shouldn't say children. I wouldn't give it to a child under the age of 7. And this one is very hard to swallow if they need to palate it. That being said, I worked with a little 7-year-old who had cold sores on her lips. And she was extremely motivated to get rid of those cold sores because she was being bullied at school for looking ugly. She was such a beautiful little one too. Anyhow, with her, I actually used Biocide and LSF topically on her lips internally. And I went right up to maximum because it was an acute situation. We used some GI detox to help bind. And she was a champ. She couldn't swallow capsules, but she wanted to try the Olivirax because she knew it was going to be an extra added support for her situation. And so we kind of mixed it up into some hazelnut butter and a little bit of honey, and she took half a cap AM and half a cap PM. On day 3, her mom sent me a picture and the cold sores were all gone. Her lips were still really red and luscious, but had you not known she had cold sores, you wouldn't have known anything. And we continued her protocol for about 5 to 6 days, and then she stopped. But I will say most kids will not champion that formula if they need to open it up. Most adults too, I would say, probably won't take Olivirax out of the capsule. Proflora, this is a spore-based probiotic. So it's Bacillus species derived from the human healthy gut. If your viewers are familiar with Microbiome Labs, it's very similar to them because we actually license our spores from Microbiome Labs. So very similar to, what is it called? Megaspore, I believe. So there's some Bacillus subtilis, clausi, and coagulans in this one. And of course, being a botanical company, Dr. Fresco added in some quercetin. So she put in quercetin because the research shows that 100 milligrams of quercetin can help with repairing damage to the intestinal barrier. And on top of that, she has some marshmallow and aloe. So it's a very soothing capsule to the GI tract. You can take it at bedtime, but if you are taking it at bedtime, you want to make sure you're not taking the GI detox at that time. So I actually have people take this with their breakfast. It's one that's very hearty. It can be taken at the same time as Biocidin because it's not damaged. Biocidin will not damage the spores. So this is one I usually say, take it at breakfast and away you go. That one very easily can be opened up if we're working with kids too. It's pretty much tasteless. I'll put that one into applesauce typically. So Biotonic, this is also one I wouldn't use with very young children. I'd say 7 and up, and more likely I'd say probably teenager and up just because of the taste. It is suspended in some alcohol. This is an adaptogenic blend. The reason why I bring this one into the equation is if we have microbial imbalances, we sometimes start to see stress levels go up, fatigue, and that's actually why Dr. Fresco designed this one. It's a combination of 2 different Chinese formulas coming together with a few additional botanicals as well. Really to support that HPAG axis. So if we're having any type of fatigue, adrenal issues, this is a nice one to bring in. I also like to use it as a digestive bitter. So if somebody is using it, I say, let's get a little extra bang for your buck again and take it before your meals, a good 20 minutes before your meals with your Biocidin, just to get those digestive juices flowing. The other reason why I love this particular formula, and I bring it into a lot of fungal protocols, is because it contains sweet wormwood, or otherwise known as Artemisia. That is known to be, the botanical itself is known to be antiparasitic. It will also help retard that hyphal growth that I showed you with yeast and mold. So if we want to stop that invasion of the growth, this is a nice one to bring in this situation. And this one, I don't find the need to titrate too much. So a lot of times I'll say take 10 drops before each meal and use it as needed throughout the day too. So this one might be familiar to you, Diane. You talked about Giardia. I think you said you picked that one up, right? So I thought I'd bring this one in just to show some case studies of how some practitioners have used Biocide. And so this was of a 34-year-old female. This individual was using 5 drops of the Biocidin 3 times a day, which is a very small amount. I mean, certainly you can go higher, but again, titration and see how your body does. And then she also was taking 10 drops of Biotonic twice a day. And she did this for 3 months. At 6 months, they retested, completely gone. So really exciting to see that, because Giardia is one of those ones that will actually it's a parasite, and it will colonize the small intestine, and then you get a lot of diarrhea. So it's not a pretty one to have. H. pylori, I thought I'd bring this one into the equation. This is not my case study. Somebody else presented this to me. This was of a 69-year-old female who was actually working with somebody out of the Naples Center for Functional Medicine. And she just wanted to share her results with us. And I think it was actually herself that sent them to us because she was so excited with what happened. She had been on Biocide for 9 months. I will say I've seen H. pylori protocols a lot shorter than that. So 3 months is probably where I'd retest, especially if we were symptom-free. But for some individuals, you might need to go a little longer than that, depending on your situation and what else is going on. But with her, she actually took Biocide Liquid, GI Detox, Olivirix, and Proflora. So almost the full line. And you can see she had quite an elevation of different markers here. That H. pylori very high, present, and then non-detectable on her post sample. So pretty exciting to see those results come through. And the last case study I wanted to share with you guys, because I know a lot of you guys are moms, so I wanted to show how we can use this with individuals that are little, our precious little kids. So this was of a colleague of mine. She was working with a 3-year-old who had extreme sensitivities to food and environment. They didn't know what her sensitivities were to. So she was actually having life-threatening situations. It was a silent reaction. So the mom would feed her something, go do something, she'd turn around, the kid was blue. So with that case, they didn't know what was going on, but they did see a lot of dysbiosis and candida. And so they decided, well, let's put her on Biocide and see what happens. And they gave her 3 drops a day and then retested. I think it was after 6 months. Yep, after 6 months. They did increase her eventually up to 6 drops based on her size. And at that 6 months, she's completely clear. And then the colleague who actually had this as her own patient ran into the lady not too long ago at a store and said, "Hey, how are things going?" She said, "Great. That's why I haven't been back to see you." So really exciting to see how that can actually change the life of a little one too. So this is our code for you guys. We want to make sure you took the time to listen in. Hopefully you learned some great things. This code here, 21DKWW10, is going to get you 10% off at the Biocide website. It will be good through to, I believe, June 15th. So go ahead and utilize that one. And if you have any questions, we'll open it up, I guess.
Yes, awesome. I want you guys to have the opportunity to ask questions. I know we said the webinar would go from 12 to 1, and we're running a little over. So I want to respect your guys' time. In the Q&A section, if you guys have any questions, please. Tekla, I just noticed you're on here. What's up, Tekla? If you guys have any questions, let's open it up for the podcast and for my YouTube channel, where this is later going to be produced. I really hope that you guys stayed to the end. And I just wanted to give you guys some calls to action here before we just turn this into questions. Whenever I have a webinar and I invite you, it's because you're on my list. So the way to get on my email list is to go to dianekaiser.com, and you can take the quiz. You can take my neurotoxic quiz, which you'll also get the ebook, Are Toxins the Root Cause of Your Symptoms? And I talk about those root causes in there, as well as healing your gut and many other things. So that's how you can get on my list. as well as to be invited to any of these so that you can ask questions live Q&A, because this is the only time that you can. And then so make sure that you get on that. That's my first call to action for you guys. My second one is that if this inspired you, please share with everybody, because our gut, when I always say, when you're in a rut, heal the gut. And this is a big part of our healing that we all need to call forth, instead of just thinking that a doctor looking for bugs is the only answer. We're looking for, as you heard today, so many talking points for the root line, the gut lining, and that these bad bugs, if they're there, they can create biofilms and they can protect themselves and they can hide behind their own little bunkers. So antibiotic resistance is known to be in the future one of the leading causes of death, because our bugs become smart through quorum sensing. It's a very serious issue that we can't just take a pill to fix every ill. We have to also get to the root cause of why they're there. The other thing I would like to call your action to is that if you guys get a protocol from the things that Aaliyah talked about today, there's many different options. The toothpaste is hands down one that I would recommend, because I didn't even know what she talked about today. I didn't even know that we swallowed 1 liter, which is this pink thing I'm holding, 1 liter of microorganisms. And 75% today of our gut, or of our chronic disease, begins in the mouth. So this is a big part of it. I learned so many really cool things today. So I took a lot of notes. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to wrap it up for today for our podcast and for the YouTube channel. And then I'm going to just continue on with questions and answers for anybody who is here live. So be sure to get on my list so you can attend live next time. And I would just like to ask you, Aaliyah, before we tune that out, there's so many different protocols on your website. I'm a huge fan of the 5-hour protocol. I'm also a big fan of tests, like you said, test, not guess. So if you guys would like to explore working with my functional medicine clinic to do some testing to get to the root of this, not just looking for bugs, but looking for all different kinds of function, like I mentioned earlier, we look at 7 I's to overcome disease and optimize energy and your beauty and your immunity, which is infections, imbalances, inflammation in your colon, and hence your whole body. Number 4, integrity of the gut lining. Number 5, impairments in digestion, like enzymes, bile, hydrochloric acid, etc. Number 6 is immune system function. And number 7 is intolerances to certain foods like gluten, because they could be causing a lot of damages to your gut lining. So we look at all of those 7 I's, which will work to help to restore your body and your tissues and heal your hormones. And like I say, ignite your inner purpose, because then you have the energy to dream, right? So if you want to explore the possibility of working with me, you can go to dianekaiser.com/call, which is DIANEKAZ, like zebra, ER.com/call. And just let us know what you're wanting to work with. You know, let us know what goals that you have, what things that you've tried, how it's affecting your life, and really how serious you are about healing, because we take women from feeling like there's no way out to miracles. And you can see a lot of the women on my website as far as the women that we've worked with all around the world. So if you have any like, oh, Diane doesn't work with people like this, or Diane doesn't work with, don't even like think about any of those assumptions. Just send a little application to see if we might be a good fit, and then we'll reach out to you. You could also go to my YouTube channel where we talk about these exact labs we talked about today. We look at a few different things. I look at 3 different functions. This on my YouTube channel is called The Best Labs to Identify Gut and Hormonal Issues plus Detox for Breast Implant Illness and Everything. Because I work with a lot of different women's toxic load. So that's my other call to action. And then my last question for you, Leah, before we turn it over to questions, is on your website. If you guys go to my, this is my specific link. If you go here, which you type in bit.ly/gut warrior, and that's spelled capital GUT and then capital W warrior. Go there, and then you'll be taken to the Biocidin website where, like she said, you can use my specific code to get the discount. And I wasn't clear when I looked at this on the slides. It says offer expires 6/7/15. Did you mean to say June or July?
June. I believe our marketing department said they'd give us to June. Usually they do 2 weeks. So I think you're also having a Q&A on June 1st. So they wanted to make sure we had that extended for you guys.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks like it's going to be, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'll talk to you guys if you can extend it to July, because we won't even get the podcast out until after that. So we'll see if we can work with you guys. But if you can, if you're listening to this now, it expires 6/15, but I'm going to see if we can extend that. The code is 221DK, which is WW, which stands for Probably Wellness Warrior 10. And if you're just like listening to this and you're like, I have no idea what to get, just apply dianekaiser.com/call, and we'll take a look at some labs with you to see how we can customize this whole journey. But I mean, several things really stood out for me, like the toothpaste, and also like using the bitters. Those are really cool tips that we can all use. But Aaliyah, what would you say if they go to the website and look at all the products? Which one is a great place to start for everybody?
For everybody, and not being concerned with any type of titration or having a Herxheimer reaction, which I didn't talk a lot about, but that's what can happen when we overload our system.
Yeah,
antimicrobials is the toothpaste, the Dentalcidin, and the throat spray or the Megacidin. Those are awesome, very easy to use. And even the probiotics, I would say, it's a pretty easy one to use. I don't typically see symptoms arise. And in fact, a lot of individuals who can't tolerate probiotics find that the spore-based ones are a lot more gentle on their system too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I see here that there's a few different things. There's Bioclear cleansing program with Biocidin capsules. Which one of those is the more popular ones of the ones that have like trio?
Yeah, so if you're wanting to do like a seasonal detox, I would say the Bioclear cleansing kit is a great one. You can do with liquid, LSF, or capsules. If you're wanting to do a cleanse on the GI tract, again, my favorite is the liquid. If you haven't tried it, Dr. Fresco doesn't put anything out that she doesn't like the taste of. And so I've tried it, and some kids actually describe it as sweet pizza. I don't know if I would describe it that way, but you have a little hint of oregano, a little berry, a little glycerin. So it's quite a palatable formulation. So if you want to do a GI cleanse, I would do the Bioclear cleansing kit with the liquid, and I would slowly titrate up. If you're wanting to do more of a systemic cleanse and go systemic past the GI tract and get into blood flow, LSF is going to be your good one.
And that stands for liquid. So you guys, the one that she's talking about, Bioclear cleansing formula with Biocide and LSF, when you click on the website and you go to programs, you'll see that on there. So it's a great place to start.
For me, one of the best ways I like to do it is low and slow. So if you're using the liquid, I would do 1 drop twice a day. Hold that for a couple days. If you're feeling good and strong, then I would bring in a couple more drops, and I would, continue to do that until I reached somewhere between 10 to 15 drops twice a day. And that would be with the liquid.
Yep. Awesome. And you guys, this is serious. The only people that I've really seen address 100% of their gut issues where they finally feel like they've moved the needle is when we've tested, not guessed. However, if you just want to give this a shot, then take the advice of what she just mentioned and to get the cleansing kit. You could also add to that toothpaste. I really like that idea. And then I also like the idea of using the Biotonic, which is the one that she was mentioning, to take about 20 minutes before meals. And that really helps the body to digest food. It's one of the things that I've really advocated for clients in my practice is to take bitters, because a lot of us lack digestive capacity. When we look at their GI map, we're seeing lack of bile production. We're seeing lack of enzyme production. We're seeing that the body is just circulating toxins and they can't clear them out of the body because they don't have healthy microbes, because there's more bad ones than good ones. So it's the things that she showed you today on the slides of what stool tests look like before and after really working with the gut to heal it and treat it, you see these bugs go away. And like I said earlier, 95% of my practice last year in 2020 had H. pylori. And if there's H. pylori at the very top, which it dictates the entire digestive tract, H. pylori will turn down the stomach acid in your stomach. And if there's low stomach acid, you're not digesting food, you're not breaking down protein and turning it into, from amino acids of the healthy meats that you might be eating or healthy proteins, into amino acids and neurotransmitters to help you have a balanced, stable, happy brain, right? So we can't digest our food. We're going to be in a shitty mood. That's just how it works. And also that stomach acid there is there to kill bad bugs and to regulate any bugs that we're eating. E. coli, one of the number one exposures, is fecal matter from touching it or consuming it, and we're getting it from a lot of our foods. So E. coli will drive up the urinary tract infections, and I see the number one thing I see women going to urgent care for these days is urinary tract infections, right? So if you have low stomach acid because of this one bug, I saw 95% of my clients' lab reports last year on the GI map. That's a high number. I usually have seen it maybe 40% the year before that. This is I keep telling you, this is critical. We need to explore what's under our hood so that we can feel good, right? So this H. pylori bug, if that's high, stomach acid's low, and bugs like Candida and bacteria and parasites, E. coli, like I mentioned, will be able to survive and get down and do damage in the small intestinal lining. And when the small intestine gets compromised, it's like, hey, welcome chemicals and undigested food particles, toxins that leak through the digestive wall into the bloodstream, and then the body goes into a fight or flight. So you'll never be able to get out of that fight or flight or feeling like you're just, like you have a lot of energy in the mind, like you have, what is it that I say? You have energy of the mind, but your body is exhausted. So this is why we have to go straight to the gut. So like I said, the calls to action are dianecase.com/call if you want to explore doing a stool test to see what might be under the hood, and to examine your hormones and your toxic load. And we'll take a look at that and get back to you if you're a good candidate to work with us. And then also, if you just want to start with a good cleansing kit, like she mentioned, you can get the trio on the website using bit.ly/gut warrior and checking out the Bioclear cleansing program, which is three supplements in one, and then adding to that toothpaste. So that's my final call to action for you guys. I'm going to move over to questions, but for you who are listening to the podcast, I hope you enjoyed it. Come back for more and make sure that you are on my list so that next time I can send you a personal invite so you can be part of the Q&A, because we have a lot of children who are suffering and don't know how to communicate that as well, that we're going to talk about next. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you on the next podcast and episode. And thank you for sticking with us for this Power Hour today.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If this episode really tugged at your soul and you're ready to have your personal breakthrough, we would love to have a heart-to-heart with you to get you crystal clear on 3 things. What do you want? What's standing in your way? And how do we get you to your soul goal in the fastest time possible? Visit my site, dianecase.com/call to schedule your free 1-hour connection session with one of our warriors to map out exactly how you want to look, feel, and live. We've helped thousands of women warriors just like you all around the world free themselves from the symptoms and suffering they never thought possible. And you just might be our next success story. Talk soon.